Why not move from, the 3, 3, and 3 to 4.5 and 4.5? Most of the men in the room were in favor of the change. But a lot of the women resisted. I'm sympathetic to that, but, we have a collective action problem. People are people, and they don't like to have things taken away. So what do we mean by that? When you start fresh, you have a clean slate. As I often say in the United States, and I think you have in Spain in many ways, in many countries, you don't have to take anything away. You're going to build it from the beginning, and you can build it if you can make it work with the support from the beginning. The United States, as terrible as leave is in the United States, we're a very interesting case because everyone in this world who works in the field of leave knows that the United States is a terrible outlier. The UN has now said there are 3 countries on the globe that don't have paid maternity leave in the national law: the United States, Lesotho, and Swaziland. So of course that's absolutely absurd, and here I speaking from the United States, I've been talking about leave for 20 years. Business leaders say, we cannot do it, it'll ruin the American economy, and I always say, I think that lacks imagination, because the entire world has figured this out, and they haven't brought these economies to their knees. So of course that's nonsense. But this is the important point, is when we did get unpaid leave in 1993, was the first law that was signed by the new President Clinton, 12 weeks of leave, guaranteed job protection, but with no wage replacement. Because it came so late, and because gender equality had begun to be accepted in the U.S. and in many countries, when the law was designed, essentially he got 12 weeks and she got 12 weeks. No one ever questioned that. It was never even suggested. Why don't you give a couple 24 and let them share it? We've never heard of that in the U.S., partly because we tend to think about individual rights. It's the American way, for better or for worse, mostly worse. But it was new, and so it was a new right, and that's the way it was presented. And if we add wages, if we're ever so fortunate to get that far in this country, there's just no question. That's exactly what will happen, is wages will go in the Family and Medical Leave Act. She'll have 12 weeks, he'll have 12 weeks. It would never have occurred to anybody that the men were taking the women's leave away from them, because we never had it. In addition, it was never framed that way. And I think that's really important to note, that it should just simply be framed as a labor market right. We need to remove the policies that make it infeasible to share. I mean, in this case, the discussion people are often asking, isn't this social engineering? Why would you want to impose a policy package that pressures people to have certain work divisions of labor? But you realize, again, I know the case in the U.S. the best, all the policies that are in place in the U.S. make it almost impossible for couples to share and share alike, because the leave is only for her, she earns less than he does, there's very little child care, there are a lot of fixed costs of caring for children, you get a child penalty, why not one parent instead of both? So the point is, all of the incentives are in place for specialization, so that women, young couples, all the research shows this, they marry with full of hopes and dreams about gender egalitarian sharing of care. The minute the first baby appears, and they look for, where is that high-quality part-time job? Where is the leave for him? Where is the child care? They don't get any of that, so she leaves the labor market. It assumes a pessimistic reality. It assumes a pessimistic scenario, which is that it's impossible to imagine that men and women's take-up might actually equalize. And it's not immediate. It's not likely that we're going to see this soon. But I think it becomes circular if the policy designs are properly, if policy is properly designed, if the architecture is very intelligent in terms of in the service of men's take-up, it will make a big difference. In other words, some of these arguments are made in these cases, like the Nordic country, where she basically has a year and he has 2 months. So the employer is actually not completely mistaken when they look at this young couple. So if we would reorient the leave towards this design that's being discussed in Spain, that they each had 6 months and it was non-transferable, their take-up would begin to equalize. We will never know until the years roll by whether it ever will be symmetrical. I think it will be in the long run, but we don't know, because we don't have a world in which the social construction isn't there. We don't have a single country on earth that has this real utopian parental leave design. Maybe Spain will be the first, I hope so. Then we need about 100 years, and then we need to come back and look. And I always say this to my students: let's put the policies in place. Let's try to reduce the social restrictions on men as full caregivers and women as fully committed to paid work. If men's and women's take-up is still very different, then I'm wrong. We have to start over. But until that happens, I don't think the opposing argument is convincing, because there's just simply no evidence for it. So when I'm in Norway, always somebody raises their hand and says, are the men really caring for the babies, or are they out hunting? I was in Israel, actually, talking about parental leave, and it was a different story. Somebody said, are the men only really caring for the babies, or, this was their theory, they drop the baby at their mom, and then they moonlight as a taxi driver during the day. They take a second job. The research that exists on this, which is very, very little, suggests that when men are on leave, especially with infants, there's some time-use research on this. Guess what? They do exactly what the women do. They care for the infants, because the care needs are quite intense. And so somebody said in the results of a qualitative study in the Nordic countries, there was in fact some difference that the men expected to have some free time during the leave, but they didn't have it, and they didn't take it. So the fact of the matter is that there are so many factors. People simply resist the idea that men are actually going to care for infants. But I am hopeful. The capacity to change your work schedule and the opportunity to put your children in affordable, high-quality child care really has to be considered with the parental leave, because they're just inseparable systems, and families are looking for all of them, together. So that's important to note. Otherwise, I would simply say your conference seems enormously exciting. I'm terribly sorry that I'm not able to be there. As far as I know, it's one of the few conferences that I've ever heard of with its really sustained focus on this equal, gender egalitarian, non-transferable leave. You are blazing trails in Spain, not always the country that people expect to see gender equality trailblazing, although I know better, I have to say. And it's very exciting, and I really wish you luck as scholars, as activists, as policymakers, and as people who live in families in Spain.